going to be in writing, which we have someone here from APNIC to read out to her story. All these youth and the next gen presenting their life stories, we also want to make sure that this is a safe place for them to be able to share the real story, because that's how we can benefit and we can walk on the path to think to do the next step. Also want to make sure that they are in a safe place. We gave them enough protection. So also respect of their stories and their sharing. This is the last thing I'm reminding. And after that, we're going to be changing the gear to Dr. Persona, and she's the founder of the digital in Medusa. She's currently focused on the research in the internet sanction, and she participates in a lot of the different projects with all the internet and digital projects. Carolina, who's going to be the second speaker, she's a senior policy and government specialist on the Oxford International Information Lab. So we're going to be hearing from her to talk about from the government side, from a government aspect, and she's been working on the internet standard and the human right. And lastly, we're going to be hearing from Charles, who's going to be a visiting scholar at the Stanford University, and he's also the founder and the director of Tech for Good Arts, Good Asia. So I think that all the speakers are coming from different disciplines and giving us all these wonderful things. In this Cooperation-SIG, we try to bring all the different aspects and dimensions together. So let me stop here and welcome all my speakers, if you can come up to the stage, and we can talk about that. So yes, Paul. Okay, I'm going to pass the microphone to Paul, and yes, there you are.
Thanks, Joy. Hello, everybody. I've been asked to speak just very quickly about the implications of geopolitics and the rise of geopolitics as it affects our community, and then as it affects the people we serve. And many of you in the room know this, so I'm not telling you anything new, but we're clearly in a stage now, if you compare to where we were in Tunis and the whole World Summit for Information Society debates back in the early noughties. The difference we're dealing with now is a more clear environment of strategic competition between the United States, its Western allies and friends, and China in particular. And that competition is being fought out, fortunately, unfortunately, in the technology space. So it's being fought out in the standards bodies, it's being fought out in the deployment of 5G, it's being fought out in chips and funding and all sorts of trade restrictions. And we now live in a space where all sorts of politicians and geopolitician types think they know how technology works and wish to restrict it. So we're facing that challenge. I think the other one, obviously, is we've got a hot war in the Ukraine, and we're seeing there not only the 2019 legislation of the Russian Federation being implemented across the 5,000 or so network operators, a form of great firewall in a distributed manner, if you like to think of it that way. But what we're also seeing, and I think this is a new feature, at the front face of warfare, Doug Mardery and others at Kentnick have shown this recently, the degree to which network operators are being threatened and forced to redirect their traffic from one set of network connections to others, and BGP tables being changed, etc., literally at the battlefront. So this is a new space we're now seeing where geopolitics very clearly collides with the way in which the technical community operates. What I would say here is we had a narrative as a community going back into the Tunis negotiations and since, and that narrative was that the multi-stakeholder model was the best way to coordinate and manage, particularly the protocol parameter part of the internet. That transit had always had a role for government because of its capital and because of treaties, The content area was always an area where governments had concerns. They've had concerns for 5,000 years around content, nothing new there. But the protocol parameter was the golden goose that laid, the goose that laid the golden egg. It was the public good. And that's where the multi-stakeholder focus should be. We as a community, I think, now need to think much more about a new narrative for what we stand for. Because the counter narrative against us now at the moment is, since Tunis, we've had the rise of the very big and powerful platforms. And those who don't like our model are saying the platforms, they're huge. They're all through these communities. It's Silicon Valley. Nothing gets done. Silicon Valley controls everything. The Americans control everything. We need a new model. And we need to be saying something different, I think. And I think APNIC has been taking a leadership in this. Our model I think our narrative should be much more at the person level and the human level. What people need to have access to these networks to help educate their kids, to help get information about health limits and health constraints like we've seen with COVID, to help get information that helps them get jobs, to get better access for agriculture, to be able to live their lives, not only in cities and advanced countries, but in rural areas and in very poor areas. And the network that best supports those aspirations is a network which is efficient. This network has grown enormously, and yet it's very efficient. There's a brilliant chart and some recent work by APNIC about the number of hops needed to complete a connection haven't changed over the whole period that the network's increased. So it's efficient, it's end-to-end, it allows people to put new content on there regularly, up to date, you can access it. We need a narrative, I think, as a community, which talks much more that what we do is directed to the real needs of human beings leading their lives now. And that's, so I think in some respects, that narrative around humans is the key part to counter the threats of geopolitics. And perhaps that's a good setup for the conversation we're going to have now.
Thank you, Paul. As you said, that all this internet and what's happening, I think this narrative is really bringing people to have a better understanding. So next, I'm going to be asking Ilona. I think she's going to be dialing from remote to share her story from Russia.
Okay, hello everybody. I hope you can hear me properly. For me, it's already morning, but for here you, it's already evening. So anyway, just a quick check. Does my sound it sounds in parallel or not, or even it's okay for you? Echoes, okay. So now it should be better. Is it better? Okay. So I was aiming not to talk about my personal story because I have been in internet governance for quite a long time. I guess it's like 8 years already. So it's pretty much a lot, especially for the young people, because I'm 28 now. And what I'm going to say is the problems that we face today, because everybody is aware about the conflict that is happening in the Europe and how it affects people with all these sanctions, no matter what the economic or visa issues or something else. At the ACC-TLD.ru, I'm working with the youth people, and our primarily aim is to make them aware of the field. So internet governance is not really a popular topic in Russia, and not a lot of people are really understand what's happening there. Of course, we have kind of internet community in Russia of the mature
recording in progress.
Events here we have domains or something else, but policy in terms of people to participate in several events like internet governance forums. And like APrIGF, for 3 years, 4 years already, I have organized our school that to make people, young people aware of the field, participate and we prepare a lot of educational fellows, events, just participants. We have, but the problem that we faced this year school and is that no longer we can motivate people to prepare. I mean, to participate in several events like internet governance forums, like APrIGF, and I'm very glad that I have how it is interesting, alumni to participate and to define your own future. But the problem is that participate there as fellows from this year, just participants and that stuff. But the problem that we face this year, it's so hard is that no longer we cannot explain people how they can really participate. You can because there are many barriers and physical ones. So you can tell them how beautiful it is, how it is interesting, how it is important to participate and to define your own future. Perception. But the problem is that Russians, abroad, but just from this year, go particular places to participate somewhere. It's so hard to now we're preparing explain people how they can really participate because there are many barriers in physical November. So it's not just I just can't find proper motivations for students because we explain them how word is working. Russians how internet is working. So what are the particular places to participate somewhere? What are the organizations that are responsible that they are open, that they are waiting taking place for you? I mean the youngsters to join them. I just can't find proper motivation. They can't even go to Europe and explain them how word is participate lively. How because I see that remote. So what are the participation is fading away gradually. What are the organizations that are responsible for? I mean they are open. That they are tired of waiting for line communication. For you, I mean the youngsters to join them. They really want to be, but they can't. And I'm glad they can't even go to Europe and good. But this is not for us so far. Because I see that remote. I don't know what to do with this, and participation is fading away gradually. It will not happen like one day, but for speakers, I mean the trend really hard. People are tired of good professionals from the industry, from the internet organizations, because it's kind of really wants to be on site. And I'm glad to see. But this is the reality that auditorium. That's good. But this is why it's a challenge. I don't know what to do with this. Put our hands off and just say, okay. No matter what, it's just not for participation. We'll continue because it's really hard to maintain our connections to still professionals from the industry, from the internet organizations, because it's kind of generation that will do the internet governance. But this is the reality. We are kind of in a challenge, and and that's why it's a challenge. This is my personal story, not as a person that was affected. No matter what, directly, but as a person who will continue who was affected. It's important to still maintain this connections, governance better. Thank you. Rise the new generation that will do the internet governance. But now we are kind of in a challenge, and we will struggle with the situation. So this is my personal story, not as a person that was affected by this directly, but as a person who was affected in my work to do the internet governance better. Thank you.
Please start with your. Thank you, Ilona. When we hear stories from Russia, there's always a little of.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
We try to understand more, and I know you have a lot of the insight from internal as external on this.
Okay.
So,
hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Afghanistan has been affected by the conflicts for decades due to its unique geopolitical attributes, and the conflicts have involved major world powers and also Afghanistan's neighbors. So the 9/11 incident started a new chapter of development and disputes in Afghanistan. Hello, everyone. And during thank you for having me. 20 years of international Afghanistan has been affected by the ICT sector, had its unique geopolitical attributes, despite being the conflicts have involved major world powers and also Afghanistan's challenges such as security and power. 9/11 incident, the main obstacles towards internet development and disputes in Afghanistan country. However, the ICT sector, the 20 years of international community's presence in Afghanistan, the ICT sector after the international, despite being the economic crisis and of the maintaining the current challenges such as security and power, the rest of issues were the main obstacles towards. Unfortunately, with the Taliban in power, freedom of the country, however, the ICT sector digital rights have been severely violated. And though the Taliban use social media platforms for broadcasting their propaganda, however, many of their leaders consider internet as a Western-based agent of moral and political subversion. There are several cases of people being detained and tortured for their social media posts and comments. By social media surveillance, the Taliban are finding and killing the former government forces as well. In a recent decree by the Taliban's Vice and Virtue Ministry in the Kandahar province, they have banned the public call offices, which are local businesses providing technological services and support from providing service to female customers. According to the World Bank reports, around 31 million people in Afghanistan did not use the internet at the start of 2022, which means that 77% of the population remain offline at the beginning of this year. Despite this, the Taliban is still switched off the internet in certain points of the country several times. According to another report by the Telecommunication Ministry of the Taliban, they have blocked access to about 28 million websites. The group's close relation with countries such as Iran, China, and Russia have influenced them to restrict open internet access in the country. Surveillance, monitoring, and weaponizing of information is what the Taliban are accused of during their 1 year of control since August 2021. And the ability to access and share reliable information is unfortunately limited. And due to the threats, our activities as civil society organizations have been restricted as well. We have not been able to organize the Internet Governance Forum or the Afghanistan Youth Internet Governance Forum or the School on Internet Governance Forum in Afghanistan for the past 2 years. Internet and access to social media is vital sites of solidarity for vulnerable groups in Afghanistan, including women, refugees, and minority groups. So in order to restrain the regime's plans towards a digitally divided and fragmented Afghanistan, the international actors have to proactively work in collaboration with local civil society organizations and activists to spread awareness about digital rights, also with the international providers to guarantee broadband access for civilians and protect the online profiles of those who are likely to be targets. There is also an urgent need of attention to increase internet access for students, in particular women and girls whose educational access remains restricted by the Taliban. By continuing interaction with key players both within and beyond the sector in the country, the international community needs to maintain a careful check on the state of internet connectivity in Afghanistan. Overall, policymakers must safeguard the fundamental interoperability of the global internet to ensure one world, one internet, one laws and regulations should prohibit fragmentation and digital divide. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahalapa. You know, it's always very impressive when you hear people talk about the story firsthand versus reading from the article or watching TV and the reporter. Next, also from Afghanistan, I have a Fatima. Fatima is a student, young and energetic, also in the internet business. So I want to pass the microphone to Fatima, please.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all fine. I would like to start my speech with a poem from Sadia Shirazi, one of the major influential Persian poets of the 13th century. Human beings are body parts of each other. In creation, they are indeed of one essence. If a body part is afflicted with pain, other body parts uneasy will remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of the human you shall not retain. This poem reflects the current state of Afghanistan, where people are facing one of the hardest periods of their lives under an oppressive regime, hardship that is being exacerbated by restrictions on internet access and freedom. With the Taliban taking control of the country for a second time, much has changed, and the internet is no exception. In the past 2 decades, the number of internet users in Afghanistan increased by over 9 million out of a population of 40 million. This increase in internet usage provided a key platform for the socio-political advocacy for Afghan citizens, where everything from politics ethnicity, religion, and even sectarianism could be discussed and debated. But under the rule of the Taliban, this access, the political freedom that accompanied it, and the discourse that occurred is threatened. The Taliban have applied oppressive policies across society, such as banning girls from education, thereby depriving half of the population of Afghanistan from their basic human rights. I still remember when the Taliban shut down internet services in several parts of Kabul following massive protests across the capital in September 2021. Concerned by large mobilization, the group cut internet connections to curb protests. This is an example of how the Taliban is trying to limit freedom of speech and political rights by taking control of the internet. People don't dare to share their ideas publicly on the internet or through social media for fear of being imprisoned or even killed. All the while, the Taliban are using the internet and social media to create a false positive picture of a new Afghanistan, whereas people are starving, selling their newborn children for a loaf of bread, migrating, and being killed. During the former government, despite the battles that women faced to gain equitable access to information and communication, there was a growing and positive presence of Afghan women in the world of social media, smart technologies, and the digital economy. This progress allowed them to contribute to educational, economic, cultural, and social improvements of the country through the free use of the internet and social media platforms. More importantly, people could be politically active both in person and on the internet. For example, in 2017, the protest movement of Uprising for Change, which called for government reforms to stop violence, and in 2016, the Enlightenment movement, which accused the government of the responsible implementation of an energy project in Hazarajat in central Afghanistan, broadly benefited from the internet and social media, as they managed to mobilize a large group of demonstrators in a way that would not have been possible through word of mouth. The return of the Taliban is reversing the political progress made over the past 2 decades. Yesterday, the Taliban's Minister of Education made a disturbing comment regarding the education of girls and opening of the schools, and I quote, "If you go to mosque and ask people how many of them would allow their 16 and 17 years old daughter to go to school, you will get your answer. We are living in an Afghan community where its culture is obvious for us." The dominance of the internet and social media by such people to spread their misogynist ideas and false representation of Afghan society creates gross misinformation and misunderstanding of the Afghan people and their culture. It ignores the difficult circumstances faced by millions of Afghans who have struggled to complete or continue their education and support their families. The internet provides a platform for connecting such people to the outside world to voice their concerns and defend their human rights and human dignity. Giving the Taliban the full authority to control the internet will have negative consequences which we are already seeing. I kindly request those present here and people fully engaged in the internet community to not forget Afghanistan and the Afghan people. Entering negotiations with the Taliban regarding the internet related issues, digital rights, and freedom of speech is necessary. If the Taliban wants legitimacy from the international community, they should respect human rights and guarantee internet access and freedom of speech online. Under the pressure of the Taliban, we need help from the international community to ensure that these rights and freedom are given so we can participate in internet governance and policy making. Thank you.
Wonderful, Fatima. Thank you for your sharing. The insights are great. Now, next, we are going to be having a sharing. This is from a nickname, Nina, and her sharing is very impressive from Myanmar, but she's not going to be here in person, and this is where we are trying to protecting her in a way, so that we are asking Louis to share her narratives here. Thank you, Louis.
No problem. On behalf of Rena. Hi all, I am Rena from Myanmar. I would like to share my story on how the internet impacts my life and the lives of our youth in terms of geopolitical situations and in terms of national regulations. Recent man-made internet shutdowns have been thrilling and frustrating, and I have growing concerns. What if I disconnect from the world forever? What are the consequences if it happens? As a developing country, the digital divide in Myanmar is high in rural areas, and there is a huge gap accessing technology. On top of that, there is an internet fragmentation approach which has banned access to social media, especially Facebook. This has separated us by shutting up mouths and closing up eyes. VPN has helped us to stay connected, and the young people are spreading the knowledge on how to use them, but the security on some types of VPN is a challenge now. Recently, it has been announced that using VPNs is a crime, as well as using Facebook. Frighteningly, anyone with those applications on their phones are being brought into the police station. Two of the biggest internet companies are now controlled by the government, and the cost of internet services is getting more expensive. The internet is not affordable anymore. It is impacting our life in terms of informal learning and exploring issues using online platforms, especially when education is not easily available to all. We used to learn many things, taking advantage of the technology while it was affordable, but it is harder and harder as the digital divide is increasing. In terms of the economy, popular online payments and the fintech industry is available, but data is not well protected by the companies running them. Unauthorized sharing of information about the origin or destination accounts is a big risk to our security and our physical integrity. In terms of bank transactions, it's very difficult to receive money from abroad, and the exchange rate situation is very difficult. This also disconnects us from the rest of the world and affects chances of traveling to and participating in international meetings such as this. In addition to that, it is triggering us to do the community projects which are supported by the international organizations. The consequence of all of this in terms of participation, particularly from the younger generation, is that voices are getting lower instead of louder, and the internet is seen as an oppressive tool that can only impact our physical life. That can also impact our physical life. Till now, there are still internet shutdowns in some regions that come suddenly and unannounced. Behind these internet shutdowns, there is also the brutality of events of a civil war. I'd like to spark conversation about how we could address these issues, about how we can support the next generation who are passionate but stifled by the barriers they are facing. We need your help.
Thank you. The story from Rina, and I know that you're out there. Thank you for sharing the story, and I know you're with us. So next, I'm going to switch to Persona, and after Persona, it's going to be Carolina and Charles. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to please to focus on some of the points that you are sharing with us, and I hope all this personal story from the last four. One from Russia, two from Afghanistan, and one from Myanmar. The stories going to give meanings by reflecting on the current standing on the trending of the internet problem and issues. So, Persona, why don't you start going to share your part? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to be very quick, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences. The internet is not just a means of electronic communication anymore. It provides us access to essential services online, and any kind of risk to access to the internet deprives people from having access to their basic rights, the right to education, and so on and so forth. And what I have seen, like what the authoritarian regimes and during conflict they do is horrendous, and we need to monitor that. We need to monitor internal internet shutdowns, and however, we should also look at our own processes. We need to look at what sort of international policies, such as sanctions and other private actions, had taken place that actually can exacerbate the problem and does not help the local communities. In working on those processes, we have to, in every conflict, we have to empower people and help them have a stronger online presence instead of just shying away and withdrawing services from that region because of like certain policies that are in place. We need to look at those policies. We need to talk to the policymakers and make it easier for people to have access to the internet. And I specifically talk about here about access to the critical properties of the internet that if people don't have access to, their online presence doesn't really exist. And that would be like access to IP addresses and so on and so forth. And just briefly, I think that banks and the tech corporations, in face of a conflict or a war, they need to look at their processes more, and they need to also like discuss and negotiate with the international community in order to take actions to give a stronger online presence to people in these conflicting zones. I know it is not easy. However, I think that a reactionary kind of just like this is not going to work and it's going to be illegal, so I'm not going to provide my services to all these people is not the answer either. Thank you.
Thank you for so nice. There's just a lot of things you mentioned, and obviously, sanction is a buzzword recently. And thank you for sharing among that and the others. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Carolina. I think you have a broader view, and maybe you can share some of your thoughts with us. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Joy. Can you confirm if you hear me fine?
Very well, thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, so first of all, many thanks to Ilona, Mohibullah, Fatima, and Rinma for their accounts. I think the situations that they have depicted illustrate very clearly the very concrete impacts of having a fragmented internet, whether driven by political conflict or geopolitical tensions. The way I think of internet fragmentation, or the way I like to define internet fragmentation, is always from the perspective of internet users. So to me, internet fragmentation really manifests the moment internet users begin to have fragmented, diverse experiences online. And I think this, may be a bit of an idealistic definition. We can argue that users online never had a fully equal experience online, but the more those cleavages manifest, the more the online experience fragments. And I think, as the prior speakers just pointed out, internet fragmentation can have very concrete human rights implications. Say again, if you don't have free access to information online, if freedom of expression is being curtailed on the internet, if we face internet shutdowns, or even if we are unconnected or have access to poor quality connections, various rights can be impacted, from the right to privacy to civil and political rights such as freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association, to even economic, social, and cultural rights. And connecting this conversation with digital technical standards, which is sort of my field of expertise, I think it is important to keep in mind that that drive for internet fragmentation is also playing out at the level of standards. Essentially, as the internet is evolving and standard setting bodies are actively discussing how to shape the networks of the future, some emerging standards proposals are seeking to transform the internet's building blocks and run the risk of further fragmenting the internet, as I like to say, from the bottom up. And in some cases, we are also seeing efforts to place multilateral standards development organizations center stage in internet governance conversations, so that intent to transform standardization and internet governance can also enable important transformations to how the internet operates. So, when we say that internet fragmentation is something that we want to, work to try and avoid, it is precisely those real life stories of how current internet fragmentation is affecting the lives of internet users that I think should serve as cautionary tales and that exemplify why it matters to work to prevent potential drivers for or fragmentation at the level of internet standards. I have some ideas about how to get there, but I think I will save those for the discussion. I understand we're a bit tight for time. So I'll maybe just, wrap it up there and, continue the conversation in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. Internet fragmentation is a big issue. I think people even have different definitions about it. So sometimes it could be very controversial, but very happy to hear your thoughts on that. So I'm going to, after Carolina, I'm going to pass it to Charles. Please share our views, and I also will encourage you to think about some of the questions you might be inspired after hear all the panelists sharing. Thank you, Charles.
Yeah, thank you, Joyce. Today we're talking about the human impact of geopolitical events in internet governance. And, when I was first given the topic, I didn't personally really realize the importance and the weight of this particular topic until actually I hear all our young people talk about it. When I typically these days look at my policy research into issues around geopolitical internet-related issues, we think about politics, we think about nation state competing or being against each other, but in fact it is really a human dimension that is very important. That's even more important. We look at issues such as surveillance, digital repression tools such as censorship, disinformation, and so on. We look at the numbers, we look at the policies, we look at the laws and regulations. But in fact, the spread of digital authoritarianism is really impacting these people, young people included, but not only young people, everybody in many of these countries. So when we look at what solutions we have, the problem is there is no vaccine for this problem. There is not even medicine. Even after when something bad happens, is there a quick and easy solution? There isn't. So what can we do? I think today when we started the session, Joyce talked about safety. She talked about how we want to make sure that the young people who are courageous enough to share with us are going to be safe. And I think that is what we really should remember. It's about protection. It's about protecting one another. And safety is important because at the same time, when they come out to share, we also have to, I also have the feeling that it is actually something that is meaningful and useful to them because we are providing the mutual support to one another. To many of these countries that are normally probably a little bit remote to us. So I think we have to network, we have to communicate, and we have to face all these challenges together. When many of our speakers previously talked about internet shutdowns and so on, now if you think internet shutdown is bad, actually internet fragmentation could be even worse because countries and governments resort to internet shutdown only because they were not able to have the technology and the resources to fragment the internet. Once they are able to manage that, to have that sophistication like China, they don't have to shut down the internet. They can fragment it. They have already found out how to do that. So it's interesting for me to note that when people were debating about cutting off Russia, for example, a few months ago from the internet, I think many of us forgot about the real daily problems, the reality that many of these Russians who are individuals, who many of them do have independent thinking and needs. We forgot about their needs. When I heard from the young man from Afghanistan about being unable to hold regional IGF, youth IGF, and School of Internet Governance, it reminds me of the importance that we have been actually talking about in many of our sessions this week about the importance of developing digital literacy. And you see that actually authorities are trying to limit the development of these very important capabilities from our young people. And it also reminds me of the importance of the multi-stakeholder model, because the multi-stakeholder model is actually a good tool for us to prevent many of these internet fragmentations and issues that we are facing. If you are already right now coming from a free country, like many of you, I think you might think that there's this, fortunately not your problem, but I would just also want to say that don't take it for granted, because your internet freedom can be lost overnight very easily. I actually come from Hong Kong, and I think the story of Hong Kong is a testament to that. Your internet freedom can be lost very quickly. When Fatima talked about self-censorship, you know, many of us used to think that self-censorship was an act of cowardice. But we have to realize, and I'm seeing it happening every day with my friends in Hong Kong, self-censorship is actually an act of survival. So she talked about, I think also the difficulties that women and minorities are facing. Well, these sort of issues are actually not only unique to countries that we would consider to be authoritative. You are seeing that in the United States of America as well. So I think we need to be here to support each other, to encourage each other, to understand that we are in the same fight, and to defend the multi-stakeholder model. And to understand that when governments sometimes talk about multi-stakeholderism, they are not really talking about multi-stakeholderism as we know it. And if you are a technician, an engineer, a developer, when you think about security, when you think about resilience in your service, in your products that you are developing, in the operation that you are involved with, please think about the human dimension and think about human rights, because that is also, I think, one of the things that for many of us, many of you in the technical community can do. And finally, think about the stories that our young people had just told us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. The focus on the stories from the young people from especially Asia Pacific, I think those are the ones that we care very much. And also even without the Asia Pacific region, I think on the internet world, everybody's connected to each other. So whatever that's happening to you, it's happening to your neighbor, to the next. At this point, I'd like to ask the floor if there's any question, you can come to the microphone, or if there's anything that you want to address to one or any of our panelists, I think that's also very welcome. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jordan Carter from AEDA, the Australian Domain Administration. I think it's good hearing the personal stories and experiences of what fragmentation or the withdrawal of services can do to people, especially in countries that are undergoing challenges and so on. And I think it's nice that it's been talked about in a forum that can be very technical, because it reminds us that as we're doing the technical work underpinning the internet, it has these real human impacts. And so I'm interested if any of the panelists have suggestions about what we can do in an APNIC setting or an APrIGF setting to help develop and build the kind of safety theme that's come through, so that the voices that we need to hear can be expressed. There's self-censorship, there's the ability to travel, there's the ability to get the connectivity to be online through internet shutdowns and so on. Are there specific things we need to change, I guess?
Thank you. We certainly do take internet as take it for granted, but there's more. Yes, please.
So I would like to follow up on the point of fragmentation, and I think something we shouldn't forget is that we shouldn't leave the global north out of the equation there, because there's many developments in the global north towards fragmentation, not in the first line for censorship, but to control copyright violations, to control gambling websites, to, well, do things in the perspective of the global north, which are like quite innocuous, but in the same process, we are furthering technology to fragment the internet, and we are also furthering that fragmentation. So we shouldn't be, well, left out of the bag.
Okay, thank you, wonderful.
Hello, my name is Onu from Bangladesh. I have question is if fragmentation is threat now in the world, because already established example, China is fragmented area. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have Paul to kind of like feedback on this and also making a closing remark. And I'm going to pass the microphone after Paul to Big Friend. If you can do a closing and a summary for our session. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think this last set of interventions remind us that the phenomenon we're talking about is not just a phenomenon of the internet, but also the phenomenon of digitization of everything. And that's happening at a different pace around the world, but it's inexorable. It's happening everywhere. And one of the things that the digitization of everything is that it takes away frictions of transaction costs. So to give the intervention from our gentleman from the global north, I'll call you the global north voice. The sort of protect copyright thing used to be done through the courts, through a legal system. It had its natural frictions, but the more you digitize everything, the more that fast and quick it becomes. So the forces towards digitization are also creating the tools, as you say, that can be used for other purposes and undermining here. So I think that issue, is an important one that it's not traditionally seen as an internet community issue. That's normally seen as a software issue, as a application layer issue. But I do think that's an issue we should be flagging too. That digitization is basically reducing all of the friction points that often defended our freedoms. My other observation about all the interventions we had today, which were fantastic and brave, it would be this. People would put this a lot of this in terms of rights, both civil and political rights and economic rights. And I think that is right. We should say that. But my experience of international politics is once you use that language, you find yourself at the member state levels of governments into certain bodies, and this can only be discussed here and discussed there. A lot of what we talked about today is basic needs. It's not just rights. I was thinking about it, and it was like safety is a basic need. Learning, health, work, access to food, being able to live in a community, understanding what is true and what is not true. These are all basic needs. They're not just rights. And I think we should, because of the way the international system works, particularly around the human rights discussions, perhaps we should also be voices for the internet, and digitization of everything is affecting basic needs of people, and we need to defend those basic needs.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I'll have Big Friend as my wonderful co-chair. We've been tackled on different topics and issues in the past. So I'm going to have him do the final conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you very much for being here. With the theme of my global online presence diminishes conflict, politics, and consequences. The objective of this session is to discuss real life scenario on how people's life have been affected by geopolitical conflict and national regulation, with a focus on case Asia Pacific, to propose a multi-stakeholder solutions, including engage with government. With this discussion and share real life story of Russia, Afghanistan, Myanmar, and we know that many more stories still remain unshared, like Sri Lanka and other countries also. As per our speaker, the global internet has been an increase in fragmentation, shutdown, and taken down by state-sponsored cyber attack, and suffered the effect of international censorship regimes. We can clearly see that huge human effect of this reduced global online presence and internet governance process.
Hi everyone, may I have your attention please? So yes, thank you. For the interest of time, we'll be moving on to the next session. So next up, we'll be having a short break, but during this break, we'll also need you to do a little bit of work. So in this time, we'll need you to, for both technologists and citizen, we'll need you to finalize your presentation. And also within your group, choose a presenter to present your findings and perhaps your finalized output. So during this break, it'll be like a 30 minutes break. So during this break, try to finalize your presentation and select a presenter. Then after that, we'll come back to the hall again together and we'll do the presentation. So with that, do enjoy your break and your discussion, and we'll see you back in 30 minutes. Thank you.